It must suck to have your previously very stable identity feel so fragile. But does this mean we let white male fragility and anger hold us hostage? Nope.
For men who have come, if you really want to support us, you can go home, you can do childcare, you can talk to some of your men friends about date rape or about sexism, about what you've gained from the patriarchy over the years. You can be creative to figure out what you want to do to stop violence against women, but this is a women's only march.
And of course, it's equal rights to have a job, to have respect, to not be viewed as a piece of meat, equal rights to set forth our own humanity, equal rights to get into graduate programs, to get into schools, to training programs. We're the bottom third of the employment in terms of pay. We represent, nonetheless, 34% of the workforce, yet we're the first to be laid off and the last to be hired. There aren't frivolous demands at all. We just want what men have had all these years.
Some of you call yourselves feminists and then do some really sexist, misogynist things. It means that if you get called to be on a panel, you need to ask whether or not there's a woman on that panel too. Yeah, even if the panel is on masculinity. Because just like you can talk about feminism, we can talk about manhood. We're well-versed in manhood.
My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and that's a non-negotiable. And they were all kind of like, okay, misgendering a trans person is an act of violence. And it is. It's an act of psychological violence. It's a denial of somebody's personhood and a complete refusal to acknowledge their identity, whether intentional or not.
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
I have never been an equality feminist. Never, ever. Not just because I don't think the present condition of men is anything I need to aspire to.
The sex class men is simply male privilege and gender identity, and it needs to be abolished if women are ever to be free.
A lot of people like to call me a man-hater, which I happily am.
The trauma that Black women hold in our bellies and bones, that has been embedded in our very DNA. The best advice from hospitals and doctors, the best medications from pharmaceutical companies to treat the congested heart failure of my grandmother didn't work because they didn't acknowledge the systemic racism that she had dealt with since birth.
And no government in the United States has ever cared about the human rights of women. That's why we're here to demand our rights, our liberation as women, because it's not going to come from the government. It's going to come from us being out on the streets.
As a feminist, I acknowledge that the society we're in right now is not really that great for any of the genders, unless you're a straight, white, cis male.
Because patriarchy has to separate who counts as human and who counts as an appropriate target for violation. And that's what gender is, that political demarcation.
I'm not as nasty as a man who looks like he bathes in Cheeto dust.
I think it's funny, you know, I think of feminism as the social, political, and economic equality for men and women. So, you know, I wish people would embrace the term, because I think it's gotten a bad rap.
If you Google my name on YouTube, you get shitheads like this dude who are making these dumbass videos that just say the same shit over and over again. I need to give you attention because you're a garbage human.
The reason that women aren't getting paid the same isn't ultimately because women don't ask right. It's because there's massive structural barriers stopping women from being paid the same. And it's not just about overt sexism in the workplace, it's about the fact that we don't value carers.
You will say yes, and it won't be what yes means. And he'll know that, but he'll know himself better. He'll know he is a good cat, a good man. He would never do a thing like that.
I'm not as nasty as Confederate flags being tattooed across my city. Maybe the South actually is gonna rise again. Maybe for some, it never really fell. Blacks are still in shackles and graves just for being black. Slavery has been reinterpreted as the prison system in front of people who see melanin as animal skin. I am not as nasty as a swastika painted on a pride flag. And
You're just a white fucking privileged racist fucking male that doesn't stand for women's rights.
We need to kill all men. I am sick of being a baby factory that produces more men that will just, in the future, subjugate me.
If two women were in a restaurant eating together, it was common for a man or a couple of men to come up to them and assume that they were there to be talked to and that they weren't there for any purpose of themselves. It's hard to believe that this happened, because it doesn't, and that really has changed. I mean, there really have been significant changes in our relationships. And
Patriarchy takes human beings who are biologically male and creates a class of people called men. Now, men are made by socialization to masculinity, and that's the process that turns a child into a boy and then into a man. Being a man requires a psychology based on entitlement, emotional numbness, and a dichotomy of self and others.
We know after 12 years since the first Take Back the Night March, violence against women has skyrocketed. Racist violence has soared across the country, from Bensonhurst to Portland, Oregon to right here in San Leandro.
You know, it doesn't really hurt men if I hate them.
You are fucking white male privileged assholes.
Sexual assault, transphobia, white supremacy, misogyny, ignorance, white privilege.
I think it's funny, I think of feminism as the social, political, and economic equality for men and women. So, I wish people would embrace the term, because I think it's gotten a bad rap.
We try and convince ourselves that it really wasn't our fault. I want to give a big fuck you to all the men who make my anger possible. And yes, I am blaming you. I blame all the men who think they are better, who think women don't know what hate is even when it's running down our thighs. I blame all the men who allowed their friends to yell bitch and hoe while telling themselves that they are not like them.
Speaking of masculinity, could you not make everything about you? Part of breaking down patriarchal norms involves deconstructing hegemonic masculinity.
Present more femme doesn't mean that I'm any less they, them.
My family and I were doing that one night, and I just kind of looked at them and said, hey guys, I'm non-binary. I don't have a gender.
Crimes men commit against women aren't done to women as random individuals. They're done because women belong to a subordinate class.
But our genders do come in a pretty wide range, because non-binary is just an umbrella term for a whole range of gender identities. It can include people who are agender, gender fluid, gender flux, gender queer, androgen, nutois, demigirl, demiboy, and so on. And because gender is such a personal thing, everyone experiences it differently. So someone might feel that they're more of a man on one day, but then more agender on another day.
Even when we do go into higher paying jobs, our wages are still cut with blades sharpened by testosterone. Why is the work of a black woman and a Hispanic woman worth only 63 and 54 cents of a white man's privileged daughter? This is not a feminist myth.
Liberty and a living planet will only be won when masculinity, its religion, its economics, its psychology, and its sex is resisted and finally defeated.
Women now have the right, in theory, to enter into any field of human endeavor. But what they discover when they get there is very often that it's too hard. Even in our hallowed legal profession, women who qualify and move into chambers find that they are subject to the most ludicrous kinds of sexist oppression.
Die, cis, scum. So, for those of you who've been living under a privileged rock your entire life and don't know what cis means, it's short for cisgender, which means that a long time ago, a doctor took 5 seconds to look at your baby genitals and say, you are going to be this person. And by some astronomical coincidence, you grew up and said, meh. And you know what? That's fine and dandy for some people.
I think also because a lot of prejudice and certainly misogyny is so normalized
And then when you start to kind of unravel it for people, they go, oh, I didn't think about that, or I didn't think about this. And if I were to say I was a feminist, it would be a personal attack on you as a man.
To me, it's almost like reverting back to the civil rights movement. Now we're telling fat folks that they have to buy an extra seat. Not too long ago, my grandparents had to sit on the back of a bus. It's almost like segregating folks based on the way they look.
I can't. Women over the past 40 years, we are better educated, which means we have more financial freedom. We don't need a man.
And I'm a feminist commentator who's pointed out the fact that women are discriminated against in this society.
Orgasm for you is like oxygen for me. Like when I am going down on you, I am actually sucking up life, retrieving my very soul from inside your stomach. I am raw meat in a slaughterhouse, packaged according to what you are hungry for that day. I am identified by my thighs and my moans and my sighs. It's funny, the ones who cry whore the loudest are the ones who are thirstiest for my blood, and my love only starts to matter and stops being make-believe, a fantasy when you're watching lesbian porn. But they quickly discover that actually what they've been missing this whole time is your cock. You're looking to experiment in the same way I must be experimenting, like a science fair where the prize for equating my entire personhood to your dick is that you get two women who are disgusted by how your breath reeks of desperation instead of just one.
I don't want to see women adopting a lot of the, I think, bad characteristics that are usually considered masculine, such as aggressiveness up to the point of fighting. And I don't think that we do not want to become that way.
There are enough red flags to clothe an army of white knights, but feminist dude is good at hacky sack. You can talk for hours. If by talk you mean listen to him talking, feminist dude has a lot to say about the plight of women until you get him drunk. And then he has a lot to say about boobs and the word no and his own feelings.
It's hard for a kid growing up now to realize that in 1964, 5, 6, whenever, if a woman sat on a park bench reading a book, chances were she would be interrupted, and that the man who came up to her would assume that she would rather talk to him than read the book.
To undo patriarchy, we need to engage white supremacy, right? And we need to engage the inequality created by our capitalist system.
All white people are pretty much the bad guys.
It is why are black women dying faster and at higher rates than any other group of people in America from preventable obesity-related diseases.
I think it's funny, I think of feminism as the social, political, and economic equality for men and women. So, I wish people would embrace the term because I think it's gotten a bad rap.
All white people are racist, all men are misogynistic, all cisgender people are transphobic, all members of a majority are biased against the members of the minority or oppressed group. In fact, most people are racist, misogynistic, transphobic, ableist, etc.
Despite all the challenges we face, I remain convinced that yes, the future is female.
I think white men can absolutely be accomplices. I think white men can absolutely, and really absolutely should be stepping up right now, right?
All white people benefit from racism with white privilege. If you are not actually dismantling racism, if you are not going to pull people up from the bottom of the pyramid to the top, then you are participating and benefiting from racism.
When I teach feminism, I tell my students feminism was not something that white women made. It's something that indigenous and black women, women of color gave white women. Because if we look at the history of the work that black women have done, the work that indigenous women have done, and you look at the politic that they engage in, right? Eradicating and abolishing slavery, abolishing different oppressions of like women not being able to work and get paid, those are all things that women of color have always championed.
I believe that society is built on the foundation. It's not what I believe, it's a fact that society is built on the foundations of colonialism and slavery.